I was getting ready for our annual fishing trip, but something felt off this year. Normally, this trip was a lively affair with my closest friends and our wives, a tradition that highlighted our unbreakable bond since childhood. This time, however, everything seemed to be unraveling. Ryan had to delay his arrival due to work, which meant his wife Laura would also be late. Frank had a meeting that cut his trip short, leaving his wife at home. When Megan found out she'd be the only wife there from the start, she decided not to come at all. The changes were a huge letdown. These trips usually brought us closer together and added a spark to our marriages, filled with laughter and unforgettable moments. Now, it felt like a hollow version of its former self. Despite my eagerness for the trip, I couldn't shake the sense of loss, especially missing those intimate moments with Megan. The week leading up to the trip had been a whirlwind of passion with Megan, a rare and exhausting fervor that we both cherished. It was a bittersweet reminder of an altered tradition. For most of the year, our intimate life had become routine, functional rather than exciting, happening maybe twice a week. It was enough to meet our basic needs but lacked the fiery passion of our early years together. Back then, we couldn't keep our hands off each other, seizing every opportunity for intimacy. But about 5 years ago, that intensity began to fade, our encounters dwindling to just a few times a week. Megan grew increasingly reluctant, leading to my frustration and occasional arguments. Over time, I learned to cope with this new reality, managing my disappointment in silence. This was on my mind that Thursday evening as I sat in the den, trying to unwind with a beer after packing. Megan was upstairs putting the kids to bed, a routine as ingrained in our lives as our altered intimate dynamics. After a while, I heard her come downstairs and head into the kitchen. She joined me in the den, holding a glass of wine, her face etched with concern. "Honey," she started, her tone serious, "we need to talk. I know this might upset you, but please let me finish before you respond. I promise to answer any questions afterward. I should have brought this up months ago, but I needed to sort out my thoughts first." Her earnestness hinted at the gravity of the situation. An inexplicable fear surged through me. Megan's demeanor was both apologetic and determined, indicating she was about to drop a bombshell. After a deep breath and a sip of wine, she continued, "Our intimate life hasn't been fulfilling for either of us. James, I love you deeply, but the excitement we once shared is gone. You're an amazing father, a great provider, and a true friend, but I need more than what we have physically." My anger flared. What was she getting at? I thought the past week had reignited something between us. Just as I was about to speak, Megan raised her hand to stop me. "James, you promised to let me finish. Please, just listen." I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stay quiet, my frustration mounting. "There's someone else," she said. "Someone who makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. It's not just about sex. It's about a connection we no longer have. I didn't want to betray you, but I need to be honest. Being with him reminds me of how we were at the start of our marriage. It's something I can't ignore." I leaped from my chair, yelling, "You cheating witch! How could you?" Megan stood her ground, pushing me back into my seat. "Shut up! I told you this wouldn't be easy to hear, but you promised to listen. Now sit down and listen." Stunned, I sank back into the chair, Megan towering over me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. Her words were cold and cutting. "I've spoken with Frank about the divorce laws. If we split, it won't be in your favor. You'll lose a lot: alimony, child support, custody of the kids, the house. Half of our savings in your retirement fund will be mine. You'd barely have enough to live on, let alone keep up your current lifestyle. Our kids would suffer too. For their sake and yours, you need to accept my decision. I still care about you, but our life won't change much on the surface. I'll be here, just not exclusively. I need time with him too." As her words sank in, disbelief and anger washed over me. Megan returned to her seat, the silence in the room oppressive. Finding my voice, I spoke, my hurt and anger barely contained. "I can't believe this. After everything, how could you betray me like this? How long has this been going on? Who is he?" Megan, her patience wearing thin, responded, "Insults won't solve anything, James. I hope you can move past this, and we can continue as we have been. This is our new reality. I can't tell you how long I've been cheating or where it happens or who I'm involved with. None of that is your business. If you start poking around, you'll face consequences you won't like. I'm done hiding my affair. The sneaking around is too much, and I need to be honest. I want to be clear about when I go out so you can watch the kids, but I won't reveal his identity to avoid any trouble. If you try to harm him or me, it won't end well, especially for the kids. If you try to interfere, there will be severe repercussions." I sat there stunned as Megan coldly revealed her affair. She was confident and seemed to have rehearsed this moment. She had a response for everything I said. I considered canceling my trip to deal with this mess, but Megan grabbed my hand as I reached for my phone. With an icy stare, Megan said, "No, you're going on this trip. The kids will stay with your parents as planned. I don't want you here for the next 2 weeks to cause trouble or find out who I'm with. You need this time away to process everything. You're going on this trip, and you won't like the consequences if you don't. My friends and I have everything covered. We have sources everywhere you might go. If you try to uncover my lover's identity or disrupt our lives, you'll face serious consequences. Accept that my plan is what's best for me. If you cooperate, I'll ensure your life continues as usual." Megan walked to her desk, retrieved a thick envelope, and handed it to me. "Here, read this so you'll believe me. We have a written report of all your actions for the past month. We've documented everything. If you interfere with my plan, well, no, and I won't go easy on you. Now I'm heading to bed. If you want any intimacy tonight, come up. Not much has to change unless you cause trouble." I sat there in disbelief. Who was this woman? What happened to my wife? I thought I knew her, but now she's revealed herself as deceitful and unfaithful. I watched her go upstairs, her hips swaying seductively. She knew she looked amazing and was using it tonight, but for once, it didn't affect me at all. Finally, I opened the envelope and started reading. I was shocked. The report was incredibly detailed, capturing things I'd forgotten. It seemed like someone had been monitoring my every move, noting even minor incidents. The report even recorded my glances at other women, something that felt perfectly natural to me. The thoroughness of this report made me suspect that someone wealthy or well-connected was behind it, given its detail and scope. It included private details, even conversations I thought were confidential. This made me wonder if I was being bugged. As I pondered my next steps, particularly how to leave my cheating wife without getting burned in a divorce, I realized I needed advice. My lifelong friends, who had a complicated history with Megan and me, seemed like the logical choice. But then a chilling thought hit me. What if Megan was involved with one of them? Seeking their counsel could backfire spectacularly if the traitor was among them, sabotaging my plans before they even began. Just as I was lost in thought, Megan called out from the top of the stairs, provocatively suggesting I join her in bed instead of brooding alone. She then retreated to our bedroom, leaving me to wrestle with my next move in this tangled situation. I never did go to bed. I spent the night on the couch in the den. Megan woke me up early as she started making breakfast. She was furious and made sure I knew it. "Get up, James. You need to clean up and get ready for work before the kids notice you didn't sleep in your own room last night. When you come back in 2 weeks, I expect you to act normal. If you mess things up for the family, I've already warned you about the consequences. I'm willing to meet your needs sometimes, but you need to do your part too. Just so you know, if you find another woman, I'm filing for divorce." I could feel my anger boiling over. I yelled, "What's going on? You can cheat and think it's fine, but I can't do the same? Not that I want to, but why is it okay for you and not for me?" Megan smirked and replied, "Come on, James. We both know you're satisfied with what you get from me. If you go looking for someone else, it's just to get back at me. I only seek outside the marriage because you're not meeting my needs as a husband. If you could give me what I need, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere, and I expect the same from you." I stammered, so furious I could barely speak. Finally, I managed to say, "I can't believe this. You never once told me you needed more or wanted to try something different in bed. You never asked me to do anything we don't normally do. How was I supposed to know you wanted something else if you never told me? I always made sure you were satisfied. Most of the time, you had multiple orgasms before we were done. How could I know something was missing when you acted like everything was fine and I was happy?" Megan stood there and then said, "Well, if you're asking now, you're really clueless, huh? It's not just about quantity, dear. It's about quality. You never learned how to please me, and I realized you never would, so I started getting what I needed elsewhere. Now get dressed. I'm tired of hearing you complain." I went upstairs and went through my usual morning routine. We had a quiet breakfast, and when our son Adam asked what was wrong, I started to explain. But Megan interrupted, saying, "Your father's just dealing with a little issue. He'll be fine after his vacation." She shot me a glare before focusing on her breakfast. I decided to ignore Megan's orders and cancel my trip with the guys. We were supposed to leave straight from work and meet up at our usual spot, Denny's, to head out together. I had my F-150 truck all set to load our gear. Mark would ride with me, while Frank would take his car since he had to return midweek. I called Mark to let him know I had to back out due to some urgent issues, and even offered my truck for their use. Mark, however, wasn't having it. "James, no way. Megan already called me and warned me you might try to cancel. She said you've been stressed but confirmed with your secretary that you have no pressing engagements. I promised her I'd make sure you come on this trip. If I have to, I'll drag you there myself. You're coming, end of story." I wanted to protest but felt a jolt of paranoia. Was Mark in on this with Megan? She claimed she was leaving this weekend, and Mark was set to join me. But then Ryan was staying home and joining midweek. Could it be him or someone else entirely? I felt trapped and needed a new plan. I thought about buying surveillance equipment, but Megan and her friends were tracking my credit card purchases, phone calls, and even cash withdrawals. They'd notice any unusual spending right away. Sitting at my desk, lost in thought, I got a call from Megan. She didn't waste any time. "James, I told you to go on your trip. It's foolish to think you can snoop into my affairs. Mark just informed me you tried to back out. This is your final warning. Cross me, and you'll lose everything, including access to your children. Do you get it?" She hung up before I could respond, leaving me in shock. Mark had betrayed me. Was he part of Megan's scheme, or was he genuinely worried about me? My old friends felt more like her allies these days. Was it possible they'd all turned against me? Nah, not all of them, surely. With no choice, I decided to go on the trip and met the guys at Denny's. While they were joking around, I sat there feeling miserable. Eventually, Frank asked what was bothering me. I hesitated before saying, "Megan's got some wild notion, and I don't know how to handle it. I can't believe she meant what she said. But if she did, my marriage is in serious trouble." Mark glanced at Frank and said, "You know Megan. She called me earlier, saying our friend here was trying to bail. She said he's been on edge and needs this trip to clear his head. I assured her we'd get him here and make sure he had a good time." Frank nodded. "Yeah, I've noticed his moodiness too. He hasn't been himself for months. A change of scenery will do you good, James. I've got beer and your favorite whiskey in my car." Turning to me, he added, "Nothing used to stop us from enjoying our cabin time. Sure, the ladies won't be there, but we'll have more drinks and stories." We set off for the fishing spot by the stream, a short 2-hour drive. We arrived in time for some serious drinking before bed. The next morning, the guys insisted on fishing, so we headed out. Fishing helped distract me, but thoughts of Megan kept creeping back. I couldn't shake the doubts about her words. Instead of focusing, I let the guys persuade me to keep drinking. Later, during supper, Frank looked at me and said, "Okay, James, spill it. You look like you've lost your best friend. What's going on?" I thought, why not? If I didn't talk to someone, I'd lose it. These guys had been my friends since school. I confided in Frank and Mark about my marriage's deteriorating intimacy over the last 3 years and Megan's bombshell revelation. After I finished, Frank looked at me, stunned. "James, are you sure Megan said that? I can't believe it. We've known her for years and she's always been so kind and caring." "Yeah, I know, but that's exactly what she said." "Is it really true?" I replied. Frank leaned back and said, "Well, James, I can't predict the outcome of a divorce, but she's right about some things. If she's doing what you say, you need to think about how to handle it. If she's being discreet, consider whether breaking up the family is worth the emotional toll on everyone. In custody battles, courts usually favor the mother unless she's proven unfit. You'd likely lose custody. It's true you'd have to support the kids until they're grown, including college expenses. Since she doesn't work, you'd pay alimony until she remarries. You might lose your home, either giving it to her or selling it and splitting the money. You'd also share your savings and retirement funds. Child support formulas heavily burden the supporting parent. Expect to lose a big chunk of your income. You'd also need to provide health care for the kids." I was floored. Hearing my attorney friend spell it out was worse than Megan's warnings. "I need to know who she's with. When I find out, I'll make sure she's not with him any longer." James, as your friend, I understand. But as a court officer, I must advise against that. I have to report any harm that comes to Megan's lovers. My advice is to deal with it and keep things normal. Maybe she'll change her mind or get it out of her system. Sticking to the status quo seems better for you. Frank, I can't believe you're saying this. How would you feel if Christine did something like that and threatened you? Would you just accept it? Frank looked uncomfortable and said, No, I'd be just as upset. But I trust Christine wouldn't do that. She loves me and knows I'm the best partner she could have. I provide for our family, and she wouldn't risk losing that or hurting our kids. Buddy, you should just accept your situation. If Megan's as vigilant as you say, you're in trouble if you try to investigate her affair. She'll find out and retaliate. Heck, she might even know about this conversation if she's monitoring you closely. Did she know where we were going? Shoot, I didn't even think about that. Darn it, now I have more to worry about. James was baffled by Mark's constant smile and Frank's oddly cheerful demeanor. He couldn't understand how his friends were so nonchalant about Megan's behavior. Finally, he sighed, Well, forget it. Let's just have some more drinks. The next morning, James woke up before his friends, needing some solitude. He grabbed his fishing gear and headed upstream to his favorite spot. Just as he was about to cast his line, his cell phone rang. He always kept it with him, though reception was usually poor. Seeing it was Megan, he chose not to answer. After she left a message, he listened, stunned to hear, Well, honey, my sources say you got some good advice from Frank last night. I hope you're going to follow it. I love you, and you're too good of a provider and father to lose. But if you do something foolish, I can manage the kids without you. Now have fun. James stared at the phone in disbelief. The cabin had no cell service, and there was no landline. How did she know about his conversation with the guys? His gear must be bugged, and someone had to be nearby to pick up the transmission. He needed to investigate later. James didn't notice Mark and Frank watching him from the edge of the trees. They grinned, gave each other a thumbs up, and disappeared back into the woods toward the cabin. Mark asked, You think that'll do it, or should we keep the pressure on? We should keep those detailed reports going for a while and keep pushing him to accept it, Frank replied. We got a good thing going. If we can get him to let Megan keep seeing us and spend full nights and weekends together, we'll be way ahead. Imagine how much better it'll be to have more time with her. She's so hooked on what we give her in bed that she'll do anything for more. If we're smart, he can clue in our wives, and we can tell them we're helping him figure things out. That'll be solid cover. James fished until nearly noon, but his mind wasn't on it. He spent most of his time pondering his marriage, trying to figure out how to uncover Megan's affair and end it. He knew he couldn't act until he found out who, when, where, and why. On a cozy Friday evening, Megan and her lover shared a quiet, intimate moment after preparing for a weekend at the cabin. They finally had some time to themselves. Feeling playful, Megan handed him a drink and sat close. Their conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and reminiscing about past adventures. The excitement for the weekend ahead was palpable. As they talked, Megan leaned in for a tender kiss, which he warmly reciprocated. Their affectionate exchange soon turned into gentle caresses. Whispering sweet nothings into his ear, Megan felt the warmth of the moment. They talked about their friend's upcoming arrival, speculating about the activities planned. The mention of a friend's visit on Wednesday added to the excitement. As the evening progressed, they stayed close, cherishing each other's company. Their bond was deep, amplified by the joy of the imminent reunion with their friends. In that moment, they savored the simple pleasures of companionship and the anticipation of good times ahead. Megan exclaimed, "Oh God, I've been craving this for so long. I can't wait for the others to arrive. Isn't Frank supposed to be here early Wednesday?" "Yeah, baby. Then you'll have both of us for 2 whole nights before I have to help babysit your loving hubby," he replied. "Oh God, I'll be so relieved when we can all 3 be together at once. Just being with 1 or 2 of you at a time has been tough. After what you've done to me, there's no way James alone can satisfy me anymore. Do you think we've covered everything? I adore him, and he's a wonderful provider and father. I don't want to lose him." "Yeah, I think we can keep him in check. I just hope James doesn't start confiding in our wives and causing trouble. We've been doing fine the last 3 years. I think we should have been content with how things were instead of getting greedy like this. Having you to ourselves all night or on a long trip sounds nice, but I'm not sure we can push James this hard. We might have unleashed something uncontrollable. Well, the bugs we planted and the few things we found that make him look bad should make him back off. I just wish he wasn't so straight and honorable. It's unbelievable we haven't found anything shady he's done. How can a man in business for himself not take advantage of situations to make extra cash? Oh, by the way, Megan, are you still keeping an eye on the finances and transactions like we discussed? Yeah, I convinced the bank to limit his cash withdrawals, but I can't control his check writing. At least we can track them if he does. I wish I had a way to keep a closer eye on the business now, Megan sighed. I regret pushing him to hire office help so I could stay home with the kids. If I hadn't insisted on being a housewife, we wouldn't be having this much fun. Staying home allowed us to play more often instead of just a couple of nights a month, or on trips. James was by the river, feeling gloomy and preoccupied. His friends tried to chat with him and lift his spirits, but their efforts were in vain. On Tuesday evening, they got him drunk. After James passed out, Frank and Mark retreated to the porch to talk quietly. I'm starting to worry, Frank. We've been talking to him for 4 days, and he's more determined than ever to leave Megan and get revenge on her lover. He's on the brink of exploding. How are we going to handle this now? It seemed so simple when we planned to control him and spend more time with her. What if he finds out and tells our wives? Calm down, Mark. I can manipulate the divorce proceedings and make her look like an angel. Even if she divorces him, it doesn't matter. We started this because she wanted to keep him around. Sure, banging her while she's married gives me a thrill, but she'd be just as enjoyable if she weren't. We need to prevent him and our wives from discovering the truth. We might need to use some physical persuasion, but let's see how things play out in the next week or two. James, having woken up and overheard snippets of their conversation, understood they were upset about his refusal to accept Megan's infidelity. Before drifting back to sleep, he resolved to handle the situation with their help. Over the next few days, James became more distant. Mark and Ryan grew concerned when all he would say was, "I'm going to find out who she's sleeping with, and they will both pay." Finally, the day arrived for them to head home. Mark rode with James in silence. Ryan drove his own car and, as soon as they reached an area with good cell service, he called Frank. Frank and Megan sat in James' living room, listening, as Ryan reported on James. "He's boiling with anger. He's more determined to make you pay than when I got to the cabin. I think we should lay low until he calms down. If he catches us, it could get ugly." Megan sat in shock, tears streaming down her cheeks. Frank, with clenched jaws, sat beside her. After a brief conversation with Ryan, Frank turned to Megan. He pulled her close, caressing her to calm her down. "Megan, don't worry. I didn't want to resort to drastic measures, but it seems we have no choice now. See how he behaves this weekend. If it looks like he's going to cause trouble, we'll file on Monday. I can freeze all your personal accounts and the business accounts pending court approval. We can convince the judge that he might drain your accounts and ruin the business if we don't take control." James came home late on Friday night and found Megan in the living room looking disheveled and upset, wearing one of his shirts. As James walked by, he noticed something odd about her appearance that made him very upset. Megan looked at him defiantly, provoking him with her posture. James, seething with anger, walked past her without a word. Megan tried to follow him into their bedroom and even attempted to join him in the shower, but James firmly told her to leave, expressing his disappointment and anger. He told her he had hoped they could resolve their issues, but now he felt there was no chance. James warned Megan that he would find a way to respond to her actions and those of her lover. After getting himself together, James quickly packed his things into his truck, going back and forth from the house. While packing, he overheard Megan on the phone. One of the last things he tried to do before leaving was transfer money from their joint bank accounts, but he discovered he was locked out because the password had been changed. This made him even angrier. Turning around, he saw Megan watching him, adding to his frustration. Megan appeared remorseful as she spoke. "I hoped you'd come to your senses and we wouldn't reach this point. You're making a grave mistake. I love you more than any man I've ever known. I don't want to lose you. If you persist, you'll risk losing the business and everything we've built. Just so you know, I've hired Frank as my lawyer. I just spoke with him and informed him of your behavior. He'll be in touch." James was stunned. He knew Frank was also her friend, but he had been James' attorney since he started practicing law. He couldn't believe Frank would betray him like this. James left his home and drove straight to his office and warehouse complex. He planned to stay there for a while. On the way in, he stopped at the gate and spoke to the guard. "I'm having trouble with my wife. She and her lover have threatened me. Call in extra security and keep all unauthorized persons off the property." Saturday morning around 10 a.m., James was leaving to grab breakfast when he got halted at the gate. A man approached him, confirmed his identity, and handed him an envelope saying, "You've been served." After the man left, James opened the envelope and found a restraining order. The restraining order declared that James was forbidden from coming within 300 feet of his wife, children, or their home. Moreover, any expenditures from his personal or business accounts required court approval to prevent him from depleting the company's assets before the divorce proceedings, which were scheduled to start the following Monday. After grabbing breakfast, James drove to his assistant's house. When she opened the door, she remarked, "James, you look terrible. What's going on?" "I need to talk. I need help, and you're the only person I can trust. I'm sorry to bother you on the weekend, but I'm in deep trouble and don't know who else I can turn to." She stepped back and gestured for James to come in. "Come on in, James. Would you like some coffee?" James followed her into the kitchen, where he saw her husband Nicholas sitting at the table. It looked like he had interrupted their brunch, as there were plates with eggs still on the table. "I'm sorry, I guess I should leave." Nicholas looked up at James and said, "You look like you've been through hell, James. Sit down and talk to us." James slowly recounted everything that had happened in the past 2 weeks. He expressed, "I don't know what to do. My so-called friends spent the last 2 weeks convincing me to accept Megan's affair. They argued that since it's been going on for years and I didn't notice, why disrupt things now? And now Frank, my former best friend, is representing Megan and tying me up in legal complications. I can't even spend money without court approval, and I can't get that until at least Monday. All my credit cards were declined when I tried to pay for breakfast. I'm cut off, and I don't even have enough money for a meal." Margaret leaned back, clearly shocked. "James, I can't believe Megan would do this to you." She turned to her husband. "Nicholas, we have to help him out." Nicholas nodded in agreement. James sat at the table, feeling a mix of anger, helplessness, and a burning desire for retribution. Nicholas pondered for a moment before saying, "If what you say is true, you need serious help. I just hope you're not being monitored. Come with me." They headed downstairs into the basement. Stopping at the bottom of the stairs, Nicholas instructed, "Strip down and give me your clothes. There's a shower over there. I'll bring you some of my clothes to wear. I'll take yours to the front door. After you've cleaned up, we'll talk. I doubt there's a bug in our house, but they might have followed you and planted a listening device outside." James changed into some old sweatpants belonging to Nicholas. Then all three of them retreated into a cement storm shelter beneath the stairway. He felt ridiculous as he began to speak, but Nicholas and Margaret reassured him. They spent the next hour communicating through written notes, meticulously planning their course of action. After considering all possible scenarios, Nicholas left to contact individuals who could assist James. They agreed that James would have minimal interaction with these contacts, and Nicholas and Margaret would lend him the necessary funds to start his investigation. They also planned to monitor Megan and James' 3 friends for a while. On Sunday, James, Nicholas, and Margaret decided to have lunch together, enjoying each other's company and sharing some much-needed laughter. Meanwhile, Megan hosted a meeting at her house with Frank, Ryan, and Mark to discuss their next moves. After their meeting concluded, they relaxed and shared their thoughts. Mark, looking troubled, broke the silence. "I'm not feeling good about all this," he admitted. "I'm not sure it was smart to meet today. What if James finds out we were here? Maybe we should lie low until we figure things out. We had a stable situation for over 3 years, and pushing the boundaries now seems risky. I'm worried this could blow up in our faces." He continued to voice his concerns about their recent actions and James's behavior, especially his time with his secretary and her husband. Although their surveillance hadn't picked up anything suspicious, he was still uneasy about the potential fallout. "Stop worrying. We've got James completely under control," Frank reassured him. "He can't access any money and we're monitoring his every move. Right now, he's with his personal assistant and her husband, feeling sorry for himself. If he tries to leave, we'll know before he even gets out of sight. He can't make a call without us knowing what he's saying, whether it's from his phone or hers." On Monday morning, James started searching for a new attorney. It was a challenge because Frank had been his legal counsel for years, but now he needed someone else. Eventually, he decided to hire Sally Hawk, who impressed him during the interview and came highly recommended. Their first course of action was to initiate legal proceedings to unfreeze James' business accounts and secure funds for his living expenses. They also hired another private investigator firm to monitor Megan. James authorized wiretaps on his house and video surveillance. Furthermore, he gave Sally the green light to start divorce proceedings based on adultery. Later that evening, Nicholas handed James the footage captured the previous day. James was devastated to discover that Megan was involved with all three of his friends. His anger burned hotter than ever, but now he knew who he was up against. The following morning, he went to his office and made 5 copies of the CD. He distributed one to each of his friends' wives, one to his attorney, kept one for himself, and placed the original in a safe deposit box. Additionally, he uploaded the video to various adult websites using the participants' real names, ensuring their betrayal would be publicly known. James set up the pay-per-view site, funneling the funds to an offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. Smirking, he realized that the key Frank had given him allowed him to implicate Frank by setting up the site from his office, if it ever traced back. He also sent still images of Megan's infidelities to several of her friends and family members via email, all from the anonymous confines of the college library computers. Though he briefly considered using Frank's office, he dismissed it as too risky. Using the college computers was easy for James. He had done it multiple times without getting caught. Despite the need for a student ID and password, he often found computers left logged in, making it simple to use someone else's credentials. Plus, the local college's lack of CCTV cameras meant he didn't have to worry about being recorded. By Wednesday, James found amusement in fielding phone calls from people who had seen the video. In the early afternoon, Megan called him in tears. "How could you do that? I thought you loved me. I told you it was just sex because you couldn't give me what I needed. How could you ruin my life like that?" James chuckled. "Olivia, you ruined your own life. I'm just delivering the payback I promised. Frankly, I'm sure you've been cheating on me for a while. All those times one of the guys made sure I was out late, things that didn't add up then make sense now. By the time I'm done, you'll regret ever crossing me." Later, Megan's sister called. "You poor fool. Looks like you finally figured out your perfect wife. I assume you sent the video. Well, now it seems she and I can share the boys. I didn't know she was with them until I got this." James shuddered as her maniacal laughter echoed in his mind. Then Frank called, and as soon as James answered, Frank started yelling. James played along, keeping him on the line for almost 15 minutes. Frank spewed threats of physical and legal harm. "You jerk! By the time I'm through with you, you'll wish you never crossed me. I'll have your wife whenever I want, and we'll have most of your money too. If you had just done what I told her, you'd still have a family, money, and a life. I'll have the guys rough you up. I've been with Megan since high school, and I'll continue to be long after you're gone. Enjoy living in the dumps because that's where you'll be. I'll file every lawsuit I can and bleed you dry." Megan's parents also called, distressed. Her mother was in tears. "James, how could you do this to Megan? I understand she hurt you, but spreading those pictures was too vengeful. Couldn't you resolve this more civilly?" By evening, James felt a grim satisfaction. He was confident that the computerized answering system his company had installed would capture Frank's threats. Initially, James had concerns about Frank's advice to set up the system with the telecom provider, but now he saw the wisdom. When a call came in, the system would answer and give a warning before recording. "Thank you for calling Central U.S. Inventory Logistics and Security Company. All phone calls are recorded. If you do not want your call recorded, please hang up now." It seemed Frank, in his fury, had ignored the warning, so all his threats were captured. James saw this as poetic justice. Megan's social circle rapidly disintegrated once the legal cases began. Meanwhile, Nicholas' contact managed to obtain crucial video and audio recordings. Despite the private investigators' failure to capture incriminating evidence, the few suspicious phone calls they intercepted were mostly ambiguous. Sally's first move was to report Frank to the State Bar Association. His law license was promptly suspended, and he was permanently disbarred for his unethical behavior and threats, even before the divorce proceedings concluded. James' divorce was finalized, with Meghan receiving only about 25% of the marital assets. James retained his company and was granted custody of the children, primarily due to an overlooked detail in the photos taken by Nicholas' contact. Among the images of Meghan and her lovers was a picture showing a child peeking through the patio door, witnessing the affair. This crucial evidence sealed the custody decision in James's favor. When the judge reviewed the damning evidence, he granted James full custody of the children. Additionally, James's lawsuit against Frank resulted in a $1.3 million damages award for breaching attorney-client privilege and engaging in misconduct while representing Meghan. Frank faced severe repercussions for his unethical relationship with Meghan, leading to hefty fines imposed by the state. As James' legal campaign progressed, Frank's financial situation crumbled, pushing him to the brink of bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Christine, Frank's wife, drained the remainder of their marital assets during their divorce. Laura, Ryan's wife, similarly claimed a significant portion of his assets. Surprisingly, Mark and Sophie remained together. As it turned out, Sophie had willingly participated in the group's escapades. However, Mark became increasingly dissatisfied with his friend's ongoing exploitation of Sophie. When Frank and Ryan moved in with Mark after being kicked out of their homes, tensions flared. One evening, Ryan's pent-up frustration led to a violent brawl where he assaulted both Frank and Mark. Ryan ended up in the hospital with severe injuries, and both he and Frank were later convicted and sentenced to a year in jail. Consequently, Mark and Sophie's marriage ended as well. Nearly a year later, James and Margaret were discussing a news article about the conflict involving Frank, Ryan, and Mark over Sophie. Margaret asked whether James had any contact with Olivia, noting her supervised visits with their children. James shook his head and replied firmly, "No, we only communicate when necessary, usually about the kids. I have no interest in speaking with her, and if I could avoid it entirely, I would." "I was just curious," Margaret said softly. "You two seemed perfect for years, and then, well, I've always wondered if you knew why she did what she did. I can't comprehend why a woman who loves her husband would act that way." James looked at Margaret, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He clenched his jaw and bit his lip before reaching into his desk drawer and retrieving a folder. "I don't know why I kept this letter. I'm not even sure why I read it. Remember when Megan's mother came to the office in tears about 7 months ago? She gave me this letter and insisted I read it before she left." Margaret opened the folder and read, "Dear James, you might wonder why I still call you dearest, but despite everything, you're the man I love. I've made mistakes that hurt you, and for that, I'm deeply sorry. My actions weren't planned, but I need to confess them. Our relationships with our high school friends were complicated, but they didn't affect us until our 9th anniversary. You were swamped with work, and I drank too much at a Valentine's Day party. Feeling lonely, things escalated when Frank and Ryan drove me home. Reminiscing about past encounters led to a moment of weakness, and I gave in to temptation. That night, I experienced intense new feelings and pleasures. This led to more encounters with them, sometimes individually, sometimes together, whenever you were away. The excitement and the fear of getting caught somehow made it more thrilling. Frank later suggested an arrangement to avoid getting caught, thinking you might agree to keep our family together. I convinced myself you might accept it, hoping to avoid losing you and the children. But now I see how much pain and betrayal my actions caused. I'm truly sorry for hurting you. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Yours always, Megan." Margaret looked up from the letter, her eyes moist but holding back her anger. "James, I truly believe she still loves you. She's hurting, but James, she was nearly as much a victim as you. I think Frank was a predator. You know we've heard terrible rumors about him for years. I wouldn't be surprised if he intentionally got her drunk that first night. No decent man, no true friend would take advantage of her like that." "Yeah, I know, Maggie, but, well, I'm not sure she's telling the whole truth. She always seemed too interested in Frank. We argued several times after parties because I thought she was too friendly, letting him get too close. But I never caught them in anything substantial. After Frank's phone call and finally catching them, thanks to you and Nicholas, I had enough doubts to get DNA tests on the children. You can imagine my relief when the tests confirmed I was their father. I believe she thinks she loves me, but it's not real love. It's more like infatuation or deep affection. I was easy to live with, a good provider, and a father. I realize now I was probably her last choice, and we married because, Well, I don't know why she married me. I loved her deeply, but I don't think she felt the same. That's why she cheated and kept cheating. She was selfish and only cared about her own pleasure, needs, and desires.